Okay, thank you very much for tuning in. So this is a quick video to capture a conversation that I had today with a potential coaching client. And I wanted to get it recorded so that I didn't lose my thought on this, okay? So the topic came up that this potential coaching client of mine has lost her job and is thinking about withdrawing funds from her RRSP to pay for debts that has accumulated from losing her job. Okay. And we find that that happens in our life, you know, where we get into a situation or something happens that is, it's out of our control, right? And we go into debt for, you know, for a few months and hopefully not for a very long time. Okay. But when you lose your job or there's like some medical issues, a divorce, okay, or a separation, we find that we're in a situation where we do go into a bit of debt. And if we have access to some RRSPs or some other money, sometimes we think about pulling those funds out and we think, okay, I've got a little bit of debt here. I'm not comfortable carrying this debt. I have a hard time sleeping. It's adding some stress to my life. So why don't I just pull from my RRSPs, pay down that debt so that it's a little bit more manageable. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to point out about pulling RRSPs to pay off your debt. So there's two things that I want to get across about pulling funds out. So one is that when you pull funds out, you are going to be taxed at your taxable margin on your income. So if you are an engineer or a working professional, you will normally be taxed in that, you know, 30 to 40% range, right? If you're on the lower income bracket, then you might be taxed between the 25 to the 30%. So keep in mind that whatever amount of money you pull out, it's going to be taxed because it's coming from your RRSP. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over to my Paint program and I can show you guys what that really means in terms of numbers. Okay, so let's just say you were going to take out $1,000 from your RRSP. Okay, this $1,000 would be taxed at your taxable margin. So let's say you are making some decent money and you're in the 30% tax bracket. Okay, so now you're in the 30% tax bracket. So what this means is that you would actually only get $700 of this money. Okay, so this is going to you, and the $300 is actually going to go to the government. Okay, so that's the first thing that you should keep in mind when you're pulling funds out of your RRSPs to help you pay for debt. Okay, and this also applies to anything that you're going to use that money for, whether it's to debt or if you're going to pull that money out from your RRSPs to buy an investment or pay down your mortgage or anything of that sort. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that you pull money out from your RRSP. I'm just saying if you are going to do it, just make sure that you are aware that you're not going to get the entire amount because it depends on what your tax bracket is. Okay, the other point about pulling out the RRSPs money, okay, is that you then lose the future growth of that money. And what I mean by that is that the money that is sitting in your RRSP, the interest that you're making from that money right now stays in your RRSP account. And that every year gets compounded. Okay, so now what we're talking about is the compound effect. Okay, so I'm just going to write that out just in case that's not coming through. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to explain this concept. So if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to explain that in the next couple of seconds. If you are familiar with compounding interest, okay, then you can, you know, jump forward to the next step, okay, or to the next part of the video. Okay, so when it comes to compounding interest, one of the ways that I like to explain it is just by showing it on a spreadsheet, but I will also explain it in an easier way that I explain compounding interest when I talk to young kids, so 15 and younger who don't understand the concept of compounding interest yet. So let me just share my screen. So here is a spreadsheet that I put together just to show the effect of compounding interest. Let's just say that in your RRSP, so let's just look on this side here. Okay, if in your RRSP, if you had $100,000 and every year you got 10% return on that money and you left that money in, so you didn't withdraw any money out, and every year you left that money in, and every year you made 10%, okay? At the midway in your 7th year, okay, you are actually going to have doubled your initial investment of $100,000. So you can see that here from the 7th year, you're going to be at about $194,000. So midway in your 7th year, you're going to be just over $200,000. And this is called compounding interest, but it's also noted as the Rule 72. Okay, because after 7.2 years, whatever amount of money you started with, if you leave it in there and don't touch it and you get 10% on your money, you will double the amount. Okay, so that is the Rule of 72. Okay, which is a pretty amazing rule to understand. Okay, so then the other thing as well is that, now let's just say that you were to pull out $20,000, okay? That $20,000, you're not going to get that full amount like we talked about earlier. What's going to happen is that depending on your tax bracket, you are going to get a portion of that. So if you are in the 20% tax bracket, you're going to give the government $4,000 of that $20,000 and walk away with $16,000. If you're in the 40% tax bracket, you're going to give the government $8,000 and walk away with 12. So that's 40%, okay? You can't argue that, right? So pretty much almost 50%, right? So think about that. So just be aware that when you pull money out from your RRSPs, whether it's to pay down your debt, to make investments, to do whatever with it, you're going to get taxed, okay, on it. So now the second thing that I wanted to show you guys was the effect on the compounding interest. So if you were to pull out that $20,000 from your $100,000 initial investment throughout the course of the year when in your RSP, at the end of your 7th year, you're going to have $162,000 in it. So not your full $200,000 like if on this side here where you just left the money in, okay? So now let's just do a comparison. So at the end of your 8th year, on this side here, if you left all the money in, you would have ended up with $214,000. Whereas on this side, because you pulled that money out, you only have $178,000. Okay, so what that really means is because you pulled out this $20,000, you've lost the ability to make $35,000. So this $20,000 is not just costing you the tax money that you are giving to the government, but it's also costing you $35,000. Okay, so if you're okay with that and you really can't sleep at night because, you know, the burden of having debt is too heavy on you, you know, then maybe doing the withdrawal from your RSP is the way to go. Okay. However, for the conversation that I had with my potential coaching client, I suggested some other alternatives. Okay, now before I go to those alternatives, I just wanted to point out that when you look at this spreadsheet, okay, if you didn't touch that money and you just left it in there for the 8 years, you would have made 14% on your money, right? So that's because it's 10% and then you're compounding that. So it actually works out to be about 14% every year, which is a really good return on your money. Whereas if you pull the 20K out, you're actually making less than 10% a year. And that's assuming that you don't pull out any more money, okay? And right, so here you're only making 10%. So just be aware that by pulling out that portion, you're going to be affecting the potential earnings that you can make from that investment. Okay, so to go over, okay, so I'm just gonna stop sharing. So now the advice that I gave on the call to my potential coaching client was look at your checking and your savings account and see if there's any money in there. If you've got the rainy day fund or that emergency fund sitting there, you might have, you know, $5,000, $10,000 money, like dollars sitting there. Take that money and go and put it towards whatever debt it is that you were going to be doing with your RSPs. Okay, so whether it's your line of credit, like if you wanted to pay off your line of credit or to pay off your credit card or whatever it is. Okay, so now the reasoning behind doing that is that, you know, you might not even need the money that's sitting in your rainy day fund or your checking or savings account for 6 months, for a year, right? So by taking that money and going to pay off your credit card, you would save 6 months or a year's worth of interest on your credit card or your line of credit or whatever you're paying for. If something was to come up during that time that you needed the additional funds back from your, you know, rainy day fund, just go to your credit card, do a cash advance, go to your line of credit and pull that money out. Okay, so now I do talk about that concept in part 2 of my book, where I talk about 12 places to find money to help you pay off your mortgage. Okay, I'm not saying to pull money out from your RSPs to pay down your mortgage. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the concept of getting rid of your rainy day fund is mentioned in this book, and the logic behind that thinking is explained in this book as well. Okay, so the way that I like to look at it is that on your credit card, let's say you're carrying a balance on your credit card, you're normally paying 20% interest on it, whereas the money that's sitting in your checking or savings account is barely making any interest. So you might as well just pull that money, put it onto your credit card. Okay, if you do need that money for whatever reason down the road, you can pull it out from your credit card. Okay, and the same thing also applies if you are carrying a balance on your line of credit. Pull the funds out from your checkings or savings, dump it into your line of credit. And that's the whole thing about a line of credit, is that if you don't use it, you don't pay interest on it. So you might as well not use it until you really have that emergency. So now your line of credit becomes your emergency fund or becomes your rainy day fund. Okay, so that was the first tip that I gave. Now the second tip that I'd like to share is the mindset around having debt. Okay, there is such a thing as good debt. So take a look at what it is that you are feeling stressed out about when it comes to debt. And if it is good debt, okay, then it might be worthwhile just to leave the money in the RRSP, leave that alone, and just leave the debt as it is and pay it off every month the way you're currently paying it off. Okay, if you need an explanation as to what good debt is, okay, you can click on one of the other videos and find out what good debt is. But basically, good debt is money that you've taken to buy an investment, and that investment is actually putting money in your pocket. Okay, some debts are actually good debts. Okay, if you're actually carrying bad debt, like a credit card debt, okay, then definitely pull that money out from your savings or from your line of credit. If it's at a lesser up interest rate, pull that money out from your line of credit and pay off your credit card. Okay, so I understand you might be thinking, but Hung, you're just going to take money from Bob to pay Peter, right? Yes, you are just moving money from one place to another place, and you still have debt, right? You know, but you're paying less interest in the long run, and that interest is your money. It's your hard-earned money, and it's post-tax money. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, so this whole thing about being comfortable with debt, it's really just figuring out, you being stressed out to pay off a debt that maybe is good debt. And if it's good debt, then maybe, you know, just look at it and don't get too stressed out about rushing to pay it off. Okay, so that is my very long spiel about whether or not to pull out money from an RRSP to go and fund your debt load. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. If you like the video, please give me 2 thumbs up, click on the like, click on the subscribe, and see you on the next video.